Notre Dame's quarterback battle is officially on, but it's not the only important position battle on offense this offseason. Left tackle is up for grabs, and the wide receiver and tight end rooms need answers soon. We're breaking down the key position battles on offense on today's Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome in. This is Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer at Fox Sports. And it is great to have you here with me on Tuesday, March 11th. And thanks for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later on in this episode. And please remember to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast to stay up to date on all the off-season content we'll be doing on the show. It's about to really heat up here in the next week as spring practice is set to kick off just over a week today, or over a week from today on March 19th. But as for this episode, we're going to dive into the top position battles to watch on offense, starting with the highly anticipated quarterback competition between Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchey, and CJ Carr. Then we're going to shift our focus to left tackle and how that one position battle could impact the rest of the offensive line and where guys end up starting there. Finally, we'll break down the wide receiver and tight end rooms, both of which need players to step up heading into 2025, specifically at the bottom of the rotation, not necessarily the starters, but some key rotational pieces. And don't forget, tomorrow, I'm going to be breaking down the top position battles on defense to watch this spring. But we begin with the quarterbacks, as we have done so often on the show and will continue to do throughout the offseason until Notre Dame names their QB1. You know the deal. It's not just the most important position battle on offense. It is the most important position battle on the team. And you can make the case that it is one of the most compelling position battles in all of college football, right? Because we love quarterback competitions. And the quarterback competition at Notre Dame coming off a run to the national championship, that is going to be filled with interest and intrigue, especially when you have so many quality competitors in this race. You know who they are. Steve Angeli, who's going to be a redshirt junior, Kenny Minchey, a redshirt sophomore, and CJ Carr, a redshirt freshman. There is so much at stake for the Irish as they look to get back to the college football playoff, and it starts right here at the quarterback position. And as I've said before, I believe Steve Angeli is going to get the first team reps. I believe he's earned that. He has the most experience. He has been the number 2 guy for the past 2 seasons. And even though he hasn't really had to be called upon much to come in, I mean, he did in the college football playoff semifinal game against Penn State, had to lead the Irish down the field in that last drive of the first half. It's actually pretty surprising that neither Riley Leonard nor Sam Hartman suffered any sort of injury that caused them to miss time. Angeli was able to get 1 start under his belt in the Sun Bowl at the end of the 2023 season because Sam Hartman and a bunch of other guys opted out of playing that bowl game in El Paso. And look, Steve Angeli performed really well in that start. He probably should have been the game's MVP. Instead, they gave it to Jordan Faison. But still, I was really impressed with what Steve Angeli showed in that game, albeit against a depleted defense on Oregon State. Still, he has experience. He's always performed well when he's come out there in garbage time, and I do think that matters. I also think it's important that the coaching staff tried so hard to get him on the field as much as possible because they trusted him to be the backup, and it proved to be a smart decision because all that paid off when he came in against Penn State, led the Irish down the field, and that drive ended in a field goal that honestly probably saved the game. But he also knows the system well, and I think this spring he has to prove that the gap still exists between him and Kenny Minchey and him and CJ Carr. Because if there was any sort of a competition between Minchey and Angeli, if there was any debate about who should be the backup, then we probably would have seen Minchey get some reps at some point last season, right? But that was never the case. They gave all the garbage time action to Steve Angeli so he could get out there, get some reps, sometimes with the first team offense because they just felt most comfortable with him coming on the field. So to me, that suggests that there's a gap, at least going into the spring. But that can all change if Kenny Minchey ends up performing really well over the course of these next few weeks. And I certainly think that he's capable of doing that, and he's going to get the second first team reps behind Steve Angeli because he's been around as well. This is going to be his 3rd spring practice with the program. I think that Kenny Minchey has a ton of raw talent, but can he be consistent? I think that's the one question with him. But he's also the most mobile quarterback. And even Riley Leonard said at the Combine that Kenny Minchey is probably the one best suited to run the football in the designed quarterback run game. That's huge because Mike Denbrock loves to run the football with the quarterback. We saw that last year with Riley Leonard, and we saw how much he ran Jaden Daniels when he was the offensive coordinator at LSU. Am I telling you that Kenny Minchey is like Jaden Daniels? No, but I do think that Kenny Minchey brings a component to the game that, frankly, these other two quarterbacks don't have. Steve Angeli and CJ Carr are mobile. They can get around. Maybe Carr a little bit more so than Steve Angeli. But when it comes to tucking the ball and running it, I think Kenny Minchey is the best of the three. And we actually saw that in the spring game last year when Kenny Minchey ran for 5 first downs. He really impressed me with his legs in that game because you look back to his high school tape, he didn't really run the ball all that frequently. But Kenny Minchey has a ton of ability, ton of talent, and now he's going to have to showcase that this spring. He has to prove that he can make good decisions. He's not going to force the ball when he doesn't have to. Quarterbacks coach Gino Guidugli has referred to Kenny Minchey as a gunslinger. And as I've said before, a gunslinger is great until that gunslinger starts throwing the ball to the other team. And Marcus Freeman prioritizes turnover differential more than any other coach, really. That is such a massive priority to him. I think that's why he values experience, because those two kind of work hand in hand. And last year, even though Kenny Minchey had a great spring game, he also had a terrible pick early on in the game. And the fact that some people have already called it a 2-quarterback competition, I don't look at it that way, but I think that maybe Kenny Minchey might be a little bit turnover prone in practice, so he cannot do that in the spring. He has to showcase all those raw abilities that get people so excited about him and why so many people want him to have a legitimate chance, but he has to limit those turnovers and showcase that his legs bring a different dynamic compared to all those other guys. I'm sure that's going to be a little bit difficult in spring practice. He's probably going to be wearing a red jersey more often than not, but he needs something to separate himself. And I think his mobility is that attribute that can do that. And lastly, you've got CJ Carr, who is trying to make the jump from 4th string to starter in the span of one offseason. Actually, not even, sorry for the sirens that are going off in the background, but CJ Carr was the 4th string last season, although he basically missed the entire fall after he suffered an elbow injury in practice. And now he's trying to go from 4th string to the starter in just a few weeks as the Irish get ready for spring practice. That's probably unlikely. It's probably something that most people couldn't do, but hey, maybe he has the talent to do just that. We know he's got the most hype, and most people believe that he has the highest ceiling. He was a borderline 5-star prospect coming out of high school, but considering he missed the entire fall, how rusty is he going to be? Rob Hunt, the head athletic trainer at Notre Dame, went into detail about CJ Carr's recovery plan, and he was basically out for 12 weeks. That's 3 months, where it went from rest to very limited throwing to finally gearing up. And then he actually started to showcase some of that in pregame warmups before the national championship. And I got to say, he looked pretty good when he was out there. And now he is considered full go for spring practice. And even though he's the youngest of the group, they've all been with Mike Denbrock for the same amount of time, which I think does give CJ Carr a slight edge here, not necessarily over Angeli or over Kenny Minchey, but it evens the playing field a little bit because Mike Denbrock has been around for 1 season. That's the same as CJ Carr. They're running a different offense than what they ran under Jared Parker and Tommy Rees, which was what Steve Angeli sort of had to deal with. He has had to change that offensive scheme over the course of the few years that he's been around the program. So CJ Carr has a great opportunity here, but he has to prove that he's not rusty after that long layoff, and he has to take advantage of the missed time by focusing on the mental aspect of the game and that actually coming through in spring practice. His reps are going to be a little bit limited to start, just in the sense that he's probably going to be the 3rd guy to go out there with the first team. But when he's out there, we know he has a ton of ability. He just has to show that. And if he has better arm talent and if he can make throws, if he can get out of the pocket and make throws all over the field that those other guys can't make, then that coaching staff is going to look at him and see the potential and see the ceiling and think, okay, maybe it's best that we roll with CJ Carr now so that down the road he reaches that full potential at Notre Dame and he could be that difference-making type of quarterback that Notre Dame has not had in a really, really long time. But just because he has the highest ceiling doesn't mean he's guaranteed to start. He has to show that he can do that as early as this season, specifically at the end of August when Notre Dame has to go down to Miami and play the Hurricanes on the road in a very hostile environment. My prediction coming out of spring is that it's going to be a 2-man race. I've said before, I think Steve Angeli is going to be the starter week 1, but as it pertains to spring practice, which is what we are focused on today, I think that it's going to be a 2-man race at the end of spring because if Angeli looks like the starter coming out of spring, which I think will be the case, I think he has too big of a gap for the other guys to make up in just 15 practices, then I think Kenny Minchey is likely to leave and CJ Carr will stay. But say that Kenny Minchey comes out and he balls out in spring practice and it looks like he might be the starting quarterback. Well, if that's the case, then Steve Angeli is going to probably leave and CJ Carr is going to stick around. So that makes it a 2-man race again. Now, if CJ Carr comes out, lights the world on fire, and he's clearly the best option, and it's not even debatable, then Notre Dame might be in a really interesting situation, because then Kenny Minchey and Steve Angeli could leave, but I don't think that's going to be the case given the fact that Carr had such a long layoff and he has so much room to make up, so much ground to make up on Minchey and Angeli as well. So my prediction, Angeli is going to be the leader coming out of the spring. Carr is going to make up the ground on Minchey enough so that Kenny Minchey does end up transferring. Again, I'm not rooting for this to happen. I think Kenny Minchey is a great player, and I would not be shocked at all if he ends up being in the mix at the end of spring practice, but that is how I see it as we sit here today on March 11th before spring practice. All right, we've talked about the three-man race at quarterback, but there might also be a three-man race for the right to protect the quarterback's blind side. So who will emerge as the starting left tackle? That's coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our locked-on college basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart. From top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets, these guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week are the Duke Blue Devils. John Shire's team, led by National Player of the Year candidate Cooper Flagg, just ripped through the ACC, going 19-1. The Blue Devils were plus 434 points in ACC games, the largest point differential by a power conference team in league play since Kentucky in 1953 and 1954. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Duke Blue Devils have done here. It's clear that our Team of the Week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, the other position battle that I'm going to be keeping an eye out for during spring practice is at left tackle. And it's not the sexiest position battle in the world, but it is very, very important. It's probably not a great place for Notre Dame to be, and that the two biggest unknowns on offense are at quite literally the two most important positions on that side of the ball, but that's the reality. And the good news is for Notre Dame, they have several quality options who can play left tackle, and there's just not really a surplus of experience, which makes it all that more intriguing. So they returned Charles Jagasaw and Anthony Knapp. Those are the two players to start a game at left tackle last season. Anthony Knapp started the first 15 games of the season, then he suffered an injury against Penn State in the college football playoff semifinal, and then Charles Jagasaw came in and started at left tackle, despite the fact that he suffered a torn pec injury in the first week of fall camp that most people expected would sideline him for the rest of the season. But I don't know if everyone expected Notre Dame to be playing a football game on January 20th, but that long time differential allowed for Charles Jagasaw to suffer the injury, fully recover, and start in the most important game of the season. A crazy turnaround for Charles Jagasaw, but now it makes it even more intriguing going into next season, because Jagasaw was supposed to start the season at left tackle. There really wasn't much of a debate about it. It was always going to be Jagasaw. Then he gets hurt. Then Anthony Knapp came in, and he did really well. It wasn't always pretty. He struggled with holding penalties throughout the first half of the season, but he did get a lot better, and we started to see him really shine at the end of the season. Just think back to Jeremiah Love's 98-yard touchdown run in that first-round playoff game against Indiana. That was set up by a great block by Anthony Knapp on the left side against Kamara, who was a first-team All-Big Ten player for the Hoosiers. And Knapp just moved him off the ball, created a lane for Jeremiah Love to run through, took it to the house, 98 yards, one of the best plays of the season, one of the most iconic plays in recent Notre Dame football history. So to now then just move Anthony Knapp off that position seems a little bit crazy, but that is the reality. And Notre Dame decided to go with Jagasaw in the national championship over Tosh Baker and Gerby Lambert, despite the fact that he missed the entire season, which I think shows how much that coaching staff trusts him and how good they think he is, because that is such a difficult ask for any player, let alone one who's as young as Charles Jagasaw, who's only a redshirt freshman at the time, to come in after such a long layoff and start in that game. But that's what he did, and he actually performed pretty well. But there's another young player in the mix, and I've already mentioned his name already. It's Gerby Lambert, who's going to be a redshirt freshman this season, came in out of high school, top 50 player in the country according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. He was a 5-star on some sites, high 4-star, depending on what site you're looking at. But either way, this guy is a big-time prospect and one of the top tackles in the country coming out of high school. He has NFL traits. He's massive. He's 6'7", 323 pounds. But I do think it was interesting that, for all the hype that there was about Gerby Lambert going into his freshman season, he never really competed with Knapp to start at left tackle, and they're the same age, which shows you that Knapp is a little bit more advanced at least at the time, but that could change, obviously, as Gerby Lambert continues to grow and develop in college, because I think everyone would have expected going into the season, if you said, hey, a true freshman is going to start at left tackle for most of the season, pretty much everyone would have predicted that person would be Gerby Lambert, but it ended up being Anthony Knapp. I do think part of that had to do with the fact that Anthony Knapp was around for spring practice. He was an early enrollee. Gerby Lambert joined in the summer. But now you have Jagasaw, Lambert, and Knapp all competing for this spot. Now, Lambert was listed as the backup right tackle in the championship game, but I still think he is probably more suited to play left tackle because Emil Wagner has got that right tackle spot down. He was very good last season, played every game, started every game, and was very consistent. Meanwhile, Jagasaw can move around a little bit. He's played left tackle and right guard so far in his career. He actually got his first action as a true freshman against Stanford, and he played guard in that game. And then people thought, okay, well, maybe he's going to play guard permanently. Then in that Sun Bowl game, just honestly less than a month later, he ended up starting at left tackle, and there really wasn't much debate about it. So he's a very versatile player. And then last season, was the expected starter at left tackle going into the year, then actually saw his first game action against Penn State in the semifinal before his start against Ohio State when he filled in for Rocco Spindler at right guard. So the coaching staff trusts him to play multiple positions, and I think some people think he's best suited to play guard, but the staff loves him at tackle. Mike Denbrock has said as much, Joe Rudolph has said as much, but he's just so good that he could excel at multiple different positions, which is not always the case, even for some really talented offensive linemen. Like, I don't think Gerby Lambert would be a very good guard, but he could end up being a great tackle. Now, Gerby has NFL traits, so there's a real chance that they might just want to get him at left tackle and get him going as soon as possible because he has the tools to become the next elite offensive lineman at Notre Dame. Some other tackles you might remember, guys like Zach Martin, Ronnie Stanley, Mike McGlinchey. Those three all ended up becoming first-round draft picks at tackle, and they started their redshirt freshman season. Now, Mike McGlinchey started at right tackle first before he shifted over to left tackle, but I think if you are going to be that good at Notre Dame, you're probably going to get on the field as a redshirt freshman. You could say the same about Quentin Nelson, but he was at guard. Quentin Nelson was a top 10 pick, but he actually redshirted his freshman season, then came on as a redshirt freshman. So that is something to consider here as we think about Gerby Lambert and his development. And now I think it just becomes a question of like, are you playing your best at each position, or are you just trying to get the 5 best players on the field? Because like Jagasaw, Knapp can also play inside. He was getting reps at center last spring. Coming out of spring practice, he was the third string center, which makes it even more insane that he ended up starting at left tackle at the start of the season. But there were some reports out there going into spring practice that Knapp might fill in for Ashton Craig, who was the starting center at the start of last season, but then missed the rest of the season after he suffered a torn ACL against Purdue. So there was some thought to maybe putting Knapp back at center, getting him some reps there, and then cross-training at guard or tackle because he's just so versatile, and they want to get him on the field because he was such a productive player on that offensive line last season. But now he is going to miss this entire spring practice because of that injury that he suffered against Penn State. So even though he's very versatile, it doesn't really help that he's going to be on the bench throughout this spring because they can't mix and match as much as they like to with the guys who they actually expect are going to contribute for the team next season. So now the question becomes this: is Lambert a better left tackle than Jagasaw? Maybe, maybe not. If he's not, is he better at left tackle than Anthony Knapp is at right guard? Because if that's the case, then maybe they start Gerby Lambert at left tackle and then move Charles Jagasaw to right guard. We know he's excelled there before, and now you are getting the 5 best linemen on the field. But where does that leave Knapp now? Because now he can't start at right guard. Now he's not at left tackle, and he's not going to start at right tackle because Emil Wagner's got that, and then you got Billy Stroud at left guard. So could he play center? Maybe. It depends on how Ashton Craig recovers from his knee injury, but there's just going to be a lot of question marks about how many of these guys are going to play because there's a bunch of really talented players in that offensive line room, but there's only 5 spots to go around. And even though there's so much in question about the offensive line, one thing you can absolutely guarantee is that Emil Wagner, Billy Stroud, and Charles Jagasaw will start if they're healthy. Billy Stroud is left guard on lock. Emil Wagner has right tackle on lock. Charles Jagasaw is going to be either at left tackle or right guard. He's going to be on the field somewhere, and I assume Ashton Craig is going to start as well, but he's not healthy, and who knows when he's going to be back to 100%. I know that the reports are that he'll be ready to go for the summer, but we're going to have to wait and see when he's actually producing at 100% level. And one thing I want to stress on the show, and something that I'm going to repeat throughout the offseason, is that we should expect a surprise, because Joe Rudolph has surprised us the past 2 off seasons, right? Like, nobody expected Sam Pendleton to start at left guard last year, and nobody expected Anthony Knapp to play over Tosh Baker once Jagasaw got hurt in camp, and that's exactly what happened. They both started against Texas A&M. The year before that, it was Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler who surprised everyone and won the starting job. So my guess is there will be another surprise this year, and we might start to get a glimpse of that in the spring, but Knapp's injury changes the dynamic of the entire group, and I could see Notre Dame cross-training Jagasaw more, and maybe he'll end up at right guard as a result. But Notre Dame needs a great offensive line next year, and this one battle at left tackle is going to shape how the entire offensive line looks like when they take the field against Miami. The offensive line can only take this team so far, because at some point the playmakers have to step up, and Notre Dame needs more go-to guys at receiver, and the tight end room is filled with question marks. So who's ready to break out? We're breaking it all down right here on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by Roy. Attention Irish fans, ever wish you could directly support your favorite Notre Dame athletes and be part of their journey? Now you can with Roy, the NIL app that puts fans in control. Before Roy, NIL deals were often handled behind closed doors, and fans like you didn't have a clear way to directly support the players you love. Now with Roy, you can make a real impact and feel closer to the athletes representing Notre Dame. With Roy, you get to choose the player you want to support, decide how much you want to contribute, and get exclusive content straight from the athletes you support. And the best part is, if your player transfers, you get your money back. So it's a risk-free way to show your support and make your voice heard. Support your favorite players directly and help shape the future of Notre Dame athletics today. So these next 2 positions I want to talk about aren't necessarily for starting roles, but they're key rotational pieces that will be very important for the offense this upcoming season. So let's start with wide receiver. Wide receiver coach Mike Brown wants a 6-man rotation at wide receiver. You look at how the snaps were distributed last year at the position, and it backs that up. So Bo Collins led the way. He had 670 snaps. Jaden Greathouse was second with 493. Chris Mitchell third with 478. Jordan Faison was fourth with 401, but he was hurt a lot. He was probably going to be closer to that 500 mark if he did not miss some time with an ankle injury. Then at 5, you got Jane Thomas with 340, and then a pretty significant dip to Jane Harrison at 211. But still, those were the top 6 guys, and the next wide receiver after those 6 was Deion Colsey, who really only came in during garbage time and in some run packages later on in the season. And now, Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell, Jane Thomas, and Jane Harrison are all gone. Insert Malachi Fields and Will Pauling. Malachi Fields, the transfer from Virginia, and Will Pauling, the transfer from Wisconsin. They were brought in to be a part of this rotation. Malachi Fields and Will Pauling both have produced at a high level in college. Malachi Fields has been very consistent at UVA these past couple of years, had over 800 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns in back-to-back seasons. Will Pauling was awesome in 2023. His numbers took a dip in 2024, but I think that had more to do with the quarterback situation at Wisconsin than Pauling's abilities. Mike Brown also coached Will Pauling before, so there's a connection there, and I think that you know for a fact that Jane Greathouse, Jordan Faison, Malachi Fields, and Will Pauling are going to take up a lot of snaps next season at Notre Dame at wide receiver. That leaves 2 open spots up for grabs, and Malachi Fields is not going to be at spring practice because he still needs to graduate from Virginia, so he's not going to be a full participant. This is the same thing that happened with Bo Collins last year. We also found out that Will Pauling is going to be out for the spring while he recovers from an injury. And Jordan Faison isn't going to be around much either because he plays lacrosse. So the only guy who you know is going to start for Notre Dame this season that will be participating in spring practice at least 100% of the time is going to be Jaden Greathouse. So now there's a bunch of players who are going to have a lot more opportunities to try and fit in those last 2 spots of the rotation. You got KK Smith, field receiver, Micah Gilbert, boundary receiver, Logan Saldate, slot receiver, and Cam Williams, field receiver. KK Smith is the oldest of this group. He's entering his 3rd year with the program, redshirt sophomore. Micah Gilbert, redshirt freshman, same with Saldate and Cam Williams. I am most confident in Micah Gilbert as the fifth option because I just love his game. We started to see that last spring. He had 2 touchdowns in the spring game, had a really impressive fall camp, but unfortunately for him, there were just too many veterans in front of him, so he couldn't really crack that rotation. And also unfortunate for him, the one moment that really stood out to me from Micah Gilbert during the actual season last year was when he dropped a perfect pass from Steve Angeli in the end zone. I'm sure he's been thinking about that a lot, and he cannot wait to get back out there and make up for that. But I just think that Micah Gilbert is ready to shine, and he's going to step up in spring practice because he's going to be getting the reps with the ones at the boundary receiver because Malachi Fields is going to be the starting boundary receiver. He's not going to be around. I think Gilbert's going to step into that role and shine. But then that 6th spot, I'm not really sure. I have all kinds of questions because I think KK Smith has the most experience, obviously, right? And it would make sense for him to come in and excel in that spot because even though he's not going to be the starting field receiver in the season, he's going to get the first-team reps while Jordan Faison is out with the lacrosse team. So it's a great opportunity for him, but he had a clavicle injury at the end of last season. I don't know if he's going to be rusty. He's dealt with a few shoulder injuries in his career already, so that is something to keep an eye out for. And you got to look at the young guys, Logan Soldate and Cam Williams. Like, Mike Denbrock has raved about Logan Soldate, which is a little bit surprising because he was the lowest rated recruit of the 3 coming out of high school, but he's a gamer. The only issue for Soldate is that he's got Greathouse and Pauling in front of him at the slot receiver position, but if he's good enough and he starts to shine in spring practice, maybe he ends up being that 6th receiver, or at least fighting for that spot as the season goes on. Ultimately, I think it's going to be Mikey Gilbert and KK Smith rounding out that group at the 5 and 6 spots, but these young guys have to take advantage of this opportunity because they're going to get so many reps with the ones and they're not going to have the projected starters in front of them. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that shakes out. It's also going to be interesting to see how the tight end room shakes out because we know Eli Raridon is going to be the starting tight end next season. He hasn't had the career that a lot of us had hoped for, but he was a borderline 5-star recruit coming out of high school. I thought he was going to be the next Michael Mayer, but unfortunately 2 major knee surgeries has set him back. But this is his 4th and final year with the program. He has got to produce now. Like, he has NFL size. He's 6'7", 250 pounds, but he needs the production to back it up, and this is a critical year for him to do that. For his career, he's only had 16 catches, 141 yards, and 3 touchdowns. It felt like Michael Mayer had games where he produced at that kind of clip, but this is a big year for Eli Raridon, and he's going to have all the opportunity to step in and dominate because Cooper Flanagan was his only competition to be the starter, and he's out for the season with a ruptured Achilles injury that he suffered against Georgia in the college football playoff. So really, the question comes down to who's going to be tight end number 2. Notre Dame went out and got Ty Washington from Arkansas in the transfer portal, but he's not going to be able to participate in the spring either while he finishes his graduation from Arkansas. Same deal as Malachi Fields and Bo Collins, as I mentioned earlier. They're bringing back Kevin Bellman for like his 100th year in the program, but I don't think you can expect much from him outside of like a leadership role because I do think he'll excel in that category, but considering the litany of injuries that he has suffered in his career, I just don't expect him to produce at the level that Notre Dame needs from their second tight end. So this is really a big time for Jack Larson to step up and show what he can do. Now, he's a little bit undersized, although he's listed at 6'3", 250 now, which is good because I felt like that was definitely the biggest concern I had about him going into college because he's not like your typical Notre Dame tight end who's like 6'6", 6'7". No, he's a little bit undersized in terms of height, but I believe that he might be the best pass catcher of anyone in that room. He's not as great of a blocker, partially due to his size, but you watch what he did in high school. He was making insane catches. It's just great ball skills, and I think this is a great opportunity for him to showcase that in spring practice. Can he take a leap and provide another option for these quarterbacks? Because like I said, the options are going to be a little bit limited with so many guys at wide receiver and tight end out, and that would be massive for the group if Jack Larson could step in and become another threat in the passing game. I love James Flanagan, the true freshman, but he's not going to be around for the spring practice. So if Larson could go out there and become just basically a safety net for these quarterbacks as they compete for the starting job, then Notre Dame could be in a much better position going forward. But if not, if Larson still needs some time and they're not really sure what they have yet in Ty Washington and James Flanagan because they're just not on campus and practicing, then Notre Dame might have to go out and get a tight end in the portal. I've said it before, Notre Dame has been tight end you for a while, but it's in the balance right now. They need a big year from this position, and there isn't much returning production. So it's going to be very interesting to follow this position throughout the spring and into the summer and fall camp. So Those are the top position battles to watch on offense. Of course, it starts with the quarterback, but keep an eye out for left tackle, wide receiver, and tight end. Those are going to be very interesting positions to follow, and whoever wins those jobs, who ends up earning those snaps on the field, that's going to go a long way in determining just how successful this offense can be in 2025. All right, that is going to do it for me today. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast. March is here, so be the most informed college basketball fan throughout the madness. I'm going to be right back here tomorrow morning with the top position battles on defense, so make sure you tune into that and make sure that you subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, remember, like this video below, or if you're listening to the pod, please rate the show 5 stars and leave a review. I'll see you tomorrow.